Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
This is the trickiest part about having this conversation, I think, for most parents, is this idea that we don't want to create in our children a fear that every person unknown to them is a threat.
A risk, a danger.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Well, Parental Guidance on Channel 9 last night started off with a lot of fun with Dodgem cars and families laughing and breaking into their own homes and showing everyone how they can undo their security. And then the mood changed amazingly and quite heavily, and we have got to talk about Parental Guidance on Channel 9 last night.
Not my children, but just the thought of that happening to your child.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm the parenting expert on Parental Guidance and the founder of happyfamilies.com.au, and I'm here with Kylie, my wife, mum to our 6 kids, and co-host of the podcast. Kylie, what did you think?
That was probably some of the hardest TV I've had to watch in a long time. But even though it was hard to watch it, it's a conversation that we just have to have. And I'm wondering, as a result of last night's show airing, how many people are actually now having this conversation with their kids?
If you missed it, here's what happened.
Charlie's just had puppies. They're just over there. Do you want to go have a look at them? Puppies?
Where are they?
Just over there. Just over behind the chair. Little puppies? You want to go? Okay.
It makes me so just angry that someone would ever do that to a child. And I know it's an actor, but I'm just like, it was as a dad doing things to me about in that scenario.
We mentioned respect of authority, obedience. It's really difficult for a kid, let alone 5-year-old kid, to tell apart, I know it's authority, but I have a gut feeling.
Can I pet your dog?
Of course you can. Tiny.
They're so soft.
She is, isn't she? She actually just had a few little puppies. I've got a few of them over in the car. You want to come see them?
Uh-huh.
They're so cute. Unbelievably cute. You want to get the other guys? You want to come check out the puppies?
Okay.
Tony.
He has puppies.
Boo. I can't talk, cry.
Well, I still get chills. It was really intense.
I was literally sitting in front of the TV weeping.
Yes.
I mean, because you put yourself there and you think, what would they do? What would my kids do? Like, we've had the conversations. Actually, we've probably let ourselves lapse a little bit here on this conversation. We were very, very good with
the first 4?
Probably our first 4. I don't reckon we've had this conversation for about 3 years, and our little ones need this conversation. And
I think that's where it hit me. It was like, we've got this adorable little 7-year-old who is just so trusting.
Yeah. And so
loves
curious.
Dogs and loves
lizards.
Loves meeting people.
Lollies.
And the thought of her being placed in that situation, I think we would have been in a similar situation to many of the parents last night.
I reckon we would have been sitting on that couch right next to Andrew and Miriam crying as we watched our kids, or Brett and Tony as we watched our kids. And what about, strength in numbers. You always think, 4 kids, 4 9-year-olds, as if there's going to be a problem.
Wow.
I've got chills even talking about it now.
I know. So is there any stats on the kids that are most at risk? Because basically last night highlighted that parenting style aside, it's no guarantee.
No, I don't.
And even having the conversations is no guarantee.
Right, yes. That just stood out so much. So I've been looking for good stats, and it seems that different states report different things in different ways at different times. So the best stats that I can find are about 5 or 6 years old now. They're from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, and it's 2014-2015 data. But what it shows is that there were just so I can't get any stats on attempted kidnappings and that kind of thing, which is the really pointy. That's the scariest of scary stuff. But in terms of suspected child abuse and child neglect, we've got about 320,000 nationally reported cases of suspected issues with kids. Like that's a third of a million. The number is just staggering. And around about 60,000 of those cases were confirmed. But there are so many cases that aren't being reported. There are so many things. I've got a couple of friends. We've got some friends who work in the police, and they literally are actually at the coalface of child protection, and they just shake their head. They say, you wouldn't believe what's going on. And you know what actually the biggest predictors are of who's most likely to suffer child abuse or child neglect? Age. Age is the most significant predictor. The most abused group, kids under the age of 1.
Oh, my goodness.
At a rate of 14.7 kids in every 1,000. And then from 1 to 4 is the next most vulnerable group. And then as children get older, the likelihood of harm is reduced, probably because they have voices and they have legs. So there are other factors as well. Gender. Gender matters enormously. Girls are almost twice as likely to be sexually abused than boys. Something like the latest data that I found was 16.7% versus 9%. But boys are actually more likely to be the victims of abusive, like physically violent behaviour. And I think the most important thing, and I made this point on the show last night, but I need to emphasise it in the podcast today. When we look at data from the Australian Institute of Criminology, sexual abuse most likely to be perpetrated by
someone they know,
someone known and trusted by the child or the family. It's something like 90% of cases the offender is known and trusted. So the breakdown basically is a male relative other than the father or stepfather, 30%. Family friend, acquaintance or neighbour, another known person, and then the father or stepfather is the lowest at 13.5%. And then the remaining 10%, that's when the offender is a stranger. So important data to know.
So in light of that data, it would seem that there's two really important conversations we need to have with our kids, because it's not always a stranger that we need to be wary of. So we used to talk to the kids about 5 really important things when it came to strangers to help keep them safe. You want to talk us through those?
And I'm so glad you said that. Like, it's literally 2 conversations. A lot of experts now say don't even talk about stranger danger. But I think that there's still value in highlighting that there can be some strangers who have bad motives, who are bad actors, who are unpredictable. But we've got to let them know that they're. I don't want to use these words with kids, but for an adult to adult conversation, we've got to let them know that they're at the greatest risk from people that we know and trust. So before the break, let's talk about those 5 things we talk to our kids about regarding strangers, and then after the break, we'll talk about how to talk to kids about people that you know and trust who might still be unsafe. Tricky is the word that we actually use. So,
first point.
Yep. This is one that we both talked about and got really clear on from the outset, and that is that most strangers are really good people.
This is the trickiest part about having this conversation, I think, for most parents, is this idea that we don't want to create in our children a fear that every person unknown to them is a threat.
A risk, a danger. Yeah, that's exactly right. So that's it. Number 1, teach the kids that most strangers are good people. But number 2, if a stranger ever approaches you, just check with your parents or with whoever's looking after you before you do anything with that stranger. And that's what we saw in the show last night.
Wasn't that so great to see that these kids...
Yeah, so good.
And I loved how the 2 siblings from the attachment parents, how they joined forces. It was just so good to see, because there is strength in numbers. You know, we saw the 4 boys and the rawness of that, thinking that 4 boys is going to be safe, and they
9
weren't.
years old, yeah.
They weren't. But then we see what happens when there's one voice.
So Rafi and Chaya, the two kids from the attachment parents, they just sort of whispered to each other, and they were so cute the way they did it, and it worked. It gave them the strength to say no. And Richard and Leon's kids, the nature parents, their kids, same thing.
We're just gonna go tell.
We'll just go check. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah,
loved it. And Harper, she was the same. I'll just go and check with the babysitter. That was Jan and Donna's little girl, 7 years old. Again, I mean, just so straight up, so strong. So I think that they're the 2 most important things. Number 1, most strangers are good people. And number 2, if you're ever approached by a stranger, you can actually talk to them. It's okay. But if they want you to do anything, go and check with your parents. I remember when we were living in Wollongong, about an hour south of Sydney, for those who are unfamiliar with the geography, we were at the Botanical Gardens one day, and somebody came up to us and said, we've just had our little guy come and let us know that there's some random stranger who has asked him to go off into the bushes to check out a lizard that he found. And fortunately, the little boy had gone and said, hey, is it okay if I check in the gardens with this guy who wants to show me the lizard. Just checking with the parents. It's the safeguard. Like get that through to your kids. Next one.
Number 3, if you're going somewhere with a stranger, always stay in public. Now, this rule...
Yeah. Even if you've checked with your parents, still stay where people can see you.
Well, and this is something that even our 18 and 19-year-olds...
Yeah, they need it.
...follow.
Yep.
If you're meeting someone for the first time, you just
public.
make sure you're in public. And they have abided by that, and it has been such a great sense of security for us.
Okay, here's a really controversial and provocative one, but I stand by it. Some people are going to hate it, but I stand by it. We have always given our children a hierarchy of helpers. So if you're lost, if you're stuck, if you're in trouble, if things are not going well for you, you sometimes need to approach a stranger and get help. And we have taught our kids, unfortunately, because when you look at the stats, you've just got to go with the numbers, that if you need help, go to a stranger, preferably a mum with children with her right then. And if you can't find a mum with children, then find a dad with children, or find a woman who is, middle-aged or looks trustworthy, or go into a store and stay in a public space, but go into a store. And the hierarchy continues. The policeman, whoever's around, but always stay in public, and that's the hierarchy that we go with. And the last thing that we teach our kids when it comes to strangers, and we've had this actually happen to one of our kids.
Oh, don't bring that up. If you ever feel unsafe, and I think the TV show touched on that beautifully, that gut feeling, if your gut's telling you that you're not safe, find another adult.
Yeah, so we had one of our kids who was walking home from the shops one time, and she felt like there was a car that was stalking her. She was like, I've seen that car. Now they're driving slowly behind me. Now they've sped off. Now they've come back again. Like, she was absolutely terrified. And so we just said, if this happens, remember, most strangers are safe. So, and in fact, she ran up the driveway of somebody's house and just knocked on the door. And that car drove away. And we've told the kids, even if you go into the backyard, so long as there's no dogs, like just go and knock on someone's door if you feel unsafe, because...
It's interesting, that day she had actually asked if she could take a walk. This was going to be literally the first time she had walked the neighbourhood on her own. And we had talked to her and explained why we didn't feel comfortable with it. And she was like, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
And literally had that experience and came home and just looked at us and went, okay, I get it.
Yeah, I'll do whatever you say. Hey, we need to talk about keeping kids safe from people who we should be able to love and trust. Actually, just before we do, and this is going to be the world's longest podcast, so we need to keep it pretty tight and move on. But I think there's a couple of common sense rules that we need to teach our kids about strangers outside of what we just said. First off, if you're around people that you don't know, who are unfamiliar to you, who are strangers, and you don't feel safe, just move away. And secondly, if a stranger promises you stuff like lollies or games or butterflies or lizards or snakes or whatever, puppy, just say no and move away. Go get an adult. And the most important thing that we've actually practiced, role-played in our living room with our 4 big kids, is if a stranger or an adult ever grabs you or touches you in a way that makes you feel scared, literally scream as loud as you can,
stop it,
or help, or don't touch me, and just keep on screaming loud. And we've got girls and they know how to scream, and we practice in our living room. Mind you, the neighbours might be concerned if we practice that too much. Anyway, right after the break, let's talk about how we can keep our kids safe from people that they should be able to trust.
It's the Happy Families Podcast.
Imagine a home where discipline got results without anyone having to feel bad or in trouble. The Do's and Don'ts of Discipline is a webinar to help parents set limits with love, compassion and humanity. Find it now at happyfamilies.com.au/shop.
It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. And today we are having one of the most difficult conversations that we need to have with our children around strangers.
We've had many conversations about stranger danger, but we probably have sort of had that
false sense of security.
Because there's 4.
We've talked about 5 things that we can talk to our children about to, I guess, prepare them and help them to stay safe when it comes to strangers. But as you've shared, Justin, the statistics actually show that more times than not, our children aren't hurt by strangers at all, that it's actually people that are well known and trusted to their families that are more times than not the perpetrators in these children's lives. So how do we have that conversation with our children? How do we help them to be safe while still trust the beautiful people in their lives? Because 9 times out of 10 they are.
Yeah.
Just that.
So I'm just going to share 5 ideas ideas. We could talk about this, and we probably should do an entire podcast on it, but let me just share 5 ideas briefly. Number 1, we teach our kids that their body is mine. Full stop. End of story. Your body is yours. And the second the second point, or the extension of that, is that no one should ever, ever, ever touch your body, especially private parts of your body. Some people talk about the underwear rule, or the swimmer rule. You know, the swimwear covers certain parts of your body, and if that's covered, then nobody should be touching that. A lot of experts will also add the mouth to that part of as another private part of your body. Nobody should ever touch your mouth because it's an invasion once again. The third thing, and this kind of goes back to what we said before the break, if anyone tries to touch you without your consent or without permission or because you don't know them, scream and shout really loudly, stop, help, don't touch me. Just scream and make a whole lot of noise. The other 2 things that I really encourage, and these are a little bit harder to talk about, but gee, they're important. If a person ever tells your child to keep a secret, particularly one that relates to private parts of their body, if they don't, that something bad is going to happen. Yeah, quite often they'll make a threat or something like that. Our kids need to know that if that happens, that the person who's saying that is wrong, and we've got to just drill that into our kids. If they say, don't tell anybody, it's wrong, especially if there's been, for any number of things, but especially if there's been any touching of those private parts of the body. And absolutely, unquestionably, no matter what, tell mum or tell dad, tell a safe person, tell a trusted adult immediately. And I think in line with that, though, as a parent, we need to take seriously any report that our children comes back to us with, so that they know that we are a safe place, that we will listen, that we do trust them. I remember somebody very, very close to me described how when she was a girl, there was a man who was visiting her dad. They were friends from work, and he made an inappropriate advance to her. She was only young, very, very young. And as soon as the man had left, she told her dad what had happened, which I just think is so wonderful, that she was actually like, Dad, this is what happened to me. And fortunately, she wasn't harmed in this instance, but she was made to feel extremely uncomfortable. She said, Dad, here's what happened. And he just said, he will never come into our home again. And she said, I just felt so safe. I felt so protected because of that. And I think it's such a great model, such a perfect model of how we need to respond to our kids if that ever happens. And what's the last one? If a person says anything to you or does anything to you, it kind of carries on from that story, that or does anything to you or your body, or says anything to you that leaves you feeling bad or yucky or guilty, tell your parents, even if you're scared. Just talk to your parents about it. That's what our kids need to know. So it's been a really, really heavy, intense and heavy conversation today. We tried to keep things light and informative, but I think that this was a really important conversation today to have. And I hope that we can continue the conversation with our children about this so that we can safeguard them. We're going to post a link to an article that I wrote called Keeping Our Children Safe from Child Abuse. We'll post that in the show notes, and we'll also put it on our Facebook page and social media so that you can get access to that and have it as a helpful reminder as a result of everything we've talked about. And there are loads of other really great resources online, so please do your research, have the conversations. I'm sure that last night's Parental Guidance episode will be a useful prompt to encourage that to happen. The Happy Families podcast, as always, is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. If you would like to get more information about how to make your family happier, visit happyfamilies.com.au. And don't forget, tonight, one more episode this week, Parental Guidance, episode 3. I just so badly nearly spilled the beans. I want to tell you, it's going to be such a great episode. Join us tonight on Channel 9 at 7:30 if you're in Australia, and you can check out that episode. And we'll be back tomorrow to discuss it and how you can help your kids to thrive a little more tomorrow on the Happy Families podcast.